Why would a starving 12-year-old crash a black-tie charity gala just to play a piano? She wasn't on the guest list. She didn't arrive in a limo. She didn't even have shoes on. But what she did have was sheet music, calloused fingers, and a determination that could cut through marble. On a rainy evening at the Grand Continental Hotel, during one of the city's most opulent charity events, Amelia Harrington, a 12-year-old girl with tangled curls and a hollow stomach, walked through the towering golden doors and asked the unthinkable, "May I play for food? But hey, before we go any further, legend says you'll have 7 days of unstoppable good luck. But only if you hit that like button and subscribe in the next 3 seconds. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Boom! You did it. Don't forget to subscribe, because we've got more powerful stories coming that you do not want to miss. The Ashford Foundation Gala was known for 2 things: raising millions for causes the elite cared about on paper and showcasing the crème de la crème of high society. Hosted annually by the formidable Sophia Ashford, the event dripped with luxury. Diamond-studded gowns, $10,000 dinner plates, and music provided by classically trained performers flown in from Europe. Guests didn't come to be moved. They came to be seen. So when Amelia, barefoot and uninvited, stepped into the center of the ballroom during cocktail hour, the room fell into a suffocating silence. The contrast was unbearable. Here was a child, visibly exhausted and obviously poor, interrupting what was supposed to be a perfectly orchestrated evening of performative generosity. The response? Laughter, confusion, a few gasps, but mostly dismissal. Sophia Ashford had mastered the art of turning moments into performances, provided she remained the star. So when Amelia stepped forward and asked to play, Sophia didn't see a child in need. She saw an opportunity to remind everyone in the room who held the UBE power. With a polished smirk and a champagne flute barely tilted in her hand, she raised her voice just enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "Oh? You want to perform for your supper?" she said, drawing out each word like she was casting a spell. "Very well, little prodigy. Play for Elise. Impress us." It was an unmistakable dare, the kind you don't expect to be answered. Behind her, murmurs rippled through the crowd. One woman chuckled behind a gloved hand. A man leaned toward his wife and whispered something about urban theatrics. They all expected failure, a cringeworthy attempt, a messy performance they could awkwardly clap at and forget before dessert. The space around the grand piano cleared, like a stage being set, not for brilliance, but for embarrassment. Amelia's walk to the piano was slow, not hesitant, but measured. She touched the keys like they were sacred. And when she sat, the room tilted. No one expected her to belong there, and that's exactly why her first note shattered everything. She didn't stumble. She didn't hesitate. Her hands moved like they had grown up with the piano, fluid, precise, but filled with something deeper: memory. The melody of Für Elise, so often reduced to a beginner's tune, became something else in Amelia's hands. Each passage built upon the last, swelling with layered emotion. The room, once noisy with disbelief, turned breathless. It wasn't just that she was good. It was that she was better than anyone they'd ever heard. Every guest who had once been on the verge of laughter now stood as still as statues. Even Sophia, still trying to sip her champagne as though unfazed, couldn't mask the sharp tension tightening her jaw. She had set a trap, but the girl didn't fall in. She soared over it. And in that instant, a shift occurred, not just in the room, but in the story they'd all unknowingly become part of. This wasn't a child seeking charity. This was a musician reclaiming space she had long been denied. And Sophia? She had just turned her gala into the backdrop for her own undoing. The room wasn't built for this. The Continental's grand ballroom, with its imported Italian chandeliers, velvet drapes, and gold-accented architecture, was designed to celebrate wealth, not raw emotion. Yet in that moment, as Amelia's small frame perched in front of a 9-foot Steinway, all that luxury became irrelevant. It was no longer a ballroom. It was a stage. Hers. She didn't announce what she was going to play. She didn't need to. The opening notes of Für Elise floated out softly, as familiar to the room as the sound of clinking glasses. But within seconds, something was different. The tempo, gentle, yes, but pulsing with an undercurrent of tension. The phrasing, more fluid than mechanical. The pauses, longer, deliberate, as though each silence had a weight of its own. Amelia wasn't playing Für Elise the way they'd heard it 100 times. She was telling a story through it. Her fingers weren't just executing notes. They were remembering something, aching, mourning, celebrating. It was Beethoven's composition, yes, but it was also her own language now, and every guest in that room, whether they understood music theory or not, felt it. A man from the Ashford board, known for falling asleep during performances, leaned forward unconsciously, his wine untouched. A woman in a satin dress whispered, "My God," under her breath without realizing. For the first time that night, no one was thinking about donations, designer labels, or who they were seen talking to. Every set of eyes was locked on that child, and every heart was caught off guard by how deeply she could reach them without saying a single word. As Amelia moved into the darker passages of the piece, the emotion thickened. Her eyes remained closed, not from nerves, but from immersion. It was as if she had vanished into the sound itself, like she wasn't playing the piano, but living inside it. And when the final note rang out, soft, pure, echoing through the stillness, it didn't fade. It hung there, suspended in silence, like the room didn't want to let go. No one clapped at first, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Then, slowly, someone stood. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom, filled with people who moments ago wouldn't have let her near the hors d'oeuvres table, was on its feet. But Amelia didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply stepped down from the bench, as quietly as she had arrived, and waited, like someone who had nothing left to prove. At first glance, Amelia was easy to dismiss. Her clothes were worn. Her face, though strikingly composed, carried the fatigue of someone far older. No name tag, no last name, no famous teacher to vouch for her. Just a piano and a need. But when she stood up from that Steinway, her hands still trembling slightly from the final arpeggios of Für Elise, she didn't just thank the crowd. She introduced herself with deliberate clarity and unflinching purpose. "Tumors, name is Amelia Harrington," she said. "I was taught by Evelyn Harrington, my grandmother, and the greatest pianist most of you have never heard of." At that moment, the temperature in the room shifted. Evelyn Harrington was a name many in the classical music underground knew of, a woman once whispered about in jazz clubs, and among professors who studied forbidden genius. She had been a self-taught, black pianist from the South, born into poverty, and constantly shut out of the white-dominated institutions that dictated who was considered a true classical musician. Her compositions were bold. Her interpretations were unconventional. And for those very reasons, she had been labeled too emotional, too undisciplined, not classical enough. What most of the elite in that room didn't know, or chose not to remember, was that Evelyn had once auditioned for the very Ashford-sponsored music conservatory and was rejected despite performing a flawless rendition of Liszt's La Campanella. Some say Sophia's own grandfather sat on the panel that turned her down, and now, 2 generations later, her granddaughter stood center stage, commanding the very room that once silenced her family's legacy. Amelia didn't come from a music school. She had no social media presence, no polished PR story. What she had was something purer, a musical lineage passed down by candlelight, in a cramped apartment where every chord she played had been earned, not inherited. Her talent wasn't curated. It was carved, out of hardship, out of generational silence, out of a determination to matter, even if the world refused to look her way. What makes a video go viral? A twist? A shock? A child doing something unexpected? Sure. But what made Amelia's performance different was that it didn't just go viral because it was surprising. It stayed viral because it was true. The video spread across platforms like wildfire. First Twitter, then TikTok, then a headline on national news. 12-year-old prodigy silences elites with Beethoven performance. But this wasn't just another feel-good clip the internet chews up and spits out. Because the more people watched it, the more uncomfortable questions it raised. Comment sections turned into town halls. Duets and stitches on TikTok weren't just reactions, they were rebuttals, confessions, challenges. Classically trained musicians began sharing their own stories of rejection, of racial bias, of being told they didn't have the look for the stage. Teachers in underfunded schools played the video in class, using it to spark conversations about gatekeeping in the arts. The conversation kept growing, not just in music forums, but in politics, in academia, in neighborhoods far from the Continental Hotel. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion, not just about Amelia's talent, but about how many Amelias the world has overlooked. Music institutions that once held rigid auditions behind closed doors began revisiting their entry criteria. Small conservatories launched outreach programs in underserved areas. Larger ones, afraid of becoming the next Ashford, scrambled to showcase their own diversity initiatives. But the real shift wasn't happening in boardrooms. It was happening in living rooms. Parents who had once told their kids to get a real career started asking if they wanted piano lessons. Families who thought classical music wasn't for people like them realized the lie was never in the music. It was in who we were told could make it. And yet, even in the glow of virality, Amelia never tried to make herself the center of the story. She made it clear. This wasn't just her win. This was a reminder that talent doesn't need wealth to be real. It just needs someone to listen. In the days following Amelia's viral performance, the internet did what it does. Best dig. At first, Sophia Ashford was praised for allowing the girl to perform, but it didn't take long for that narrative to fracture. When people looked closer, what they found wasn't grace. It was damage control. Cold, calculated damage control. Clips of Sophia's dismissive tone. The smugness. The fact that she dared Amelia to not embarrass herself. All of it painted a portrait, not of a benevolent benefactor, but of a woman so embedded in the comfort of her own privilege, she couldn't recognize greatness when it walked into her ballroom barefoot. Then came the audit, a group of independent journalists sparked by the viral moment, launched a crowdsourced investigation into the Ashford Foundation. What they found was damning. The foundation, which boasted millions in donations each year, had allocated less than 3% to direct community aid in the last decade. The rest? Lavish events, inflated salaries, consulting fees, and a series of mysteriously shelved youth music. Programs that, as it turned out, had disproportionately denied funding to minority applicants. Public outcry followed swiftly. Hashtags like #MewTrue, Play for Food, and Gatekeepers Exposed began trending globally. Musicians, educators, and former grant applicants came forward with their stories. Projects denied, auditions canceled, opportunities yanked last minute with no explanation. The face behind most of those rejections? Sophia Ashford. It wasn't just bad PR, it was institutional rot, personified. Soon, corporate sponsors began pulling out. Symphony organizations severed ties. Members of the Ashford Foundation's board resigned en masse. Sophia, once a fixture in philanthropic and arts circles, found herself uninvited from her own scene. She tried to spin the narrative, issuing a statement that called the moment a misunderstanding. But the public wasn't buying it. Because while Sophia had spent decades building a fortress of reputation around herself, Amelia had only needed 3 minutes to reveal what was hiding. Inside, a brittle, elitist system clinging to control under the guise of culture. And when the final blow came, a lawsuit from a former employee alleging racial discrimination and mismanagement of funds, it wasn't a piano that struck the last note. It was the sound of the gates finally falling. For most of her life, Amelia Harrington had no stage. Her lessons were whispered in cramped apartments, her concerts played to peeling walls and an audience of one, her grandmother. But Evelyn Harrington didn't just teach scales and sonatas. She passed down something far more valuable, a philosophy. That music belongs to everyone. That the truest compositions aren't written in ink, but in blood, struggle, and soul. Evelyn had lived through decades of closed doors, rejected by elite conservatories, snubbed by orchestras, ignored by patrons. She was told, over and over, that talent wasn't enough. Not when you didn't have the right name, the right background, the right skin. But instead of breaking, she created. In kitchens, in basements, on borrowed instruments with broken keys. Her style, an electrifying blend of classical precision and jazz improvisation, was ahead of its time, yet buried beneath the weight of systemic exclusion. Amelia didn't just inherit her grandmother's gift, she inherited her unfinished fight. So when she stood before that ballroom full of skeptics, she wasn't just playing Beethoven, she was playing for Evelyn. Every note carried the echoes of unplayed symphonies, unsung melodies, and years of genius dismissed as noise. Her performance wasn't a debut, it was a resurrection, a reclaiming. But reclaiming wasn't enough. Amelia didn't want to follow the path her grandmother had been denied. She wanted to redraw it, not just to get inside the halls of the elite, but to crack them open so others could enter too. She began using her newfound platform not just to perform, but to provoke, to question why brilliance still needs validation from the very institutions that once silenced it. She launched the Harrington Initiative, a music fellowship in her grandmother's name, dedicated to identifying prodigious young talents from overlooked communities. But it's more than scholarships. It's masterclasses in living rooms, pianos donated to housing projects, and recitals held in public parks instead of concert halls. For Amelia, redefining legacy doesn't mean rewriting the past. It means making sure no other genius has to be forgotten just to be remembered. If you felt something during this story, Imagine how many voices are still waiting to be heard. Hit that like button to amplify stories that matter. Subscribe for more powerful narratives like this one. Let's keep telling stories that challenge the system and celebrate those who rise through it.